I never cease to be amazed how appropriate, even though it can't be planned, the Word of God is when it's broken open for us in our current situations. And it's with that in mind I want to reference back, which I had planned on doing all along, to the hymn Amazing Grace. I want to unpack a great deal around this parable or this story of Bartimaeus and its applications, and end with what it might look like in a modern context. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, and now I see. What an extraordinary proclamation. Is it a prayer? Is it a petition? Is it a hope? Is it a guaranteed promise? And maybe it's some of all of those. But we're gathered by that amazing grace. You know, and it's sometimes in my life I used to think it wasn't good that it said, a wretch like me. But now that I've gotten a little older, I'm really glad it says a wretch like me. I think we have to recognize our own brokenness before we can be healed. You have to know you're lost before you're really found. And yes, you have to know you're blind before you can see. It's important to understand, I think, a lot of the context of this parable, of this story of Bartimaeus. The first line is incredibly important. Jesus leaves with his disciples, and he encounters Bartimaeus begging along the road. It is important for us to understand what it would have been like to have been blind a couple thousand years ago. The most important thing would have been people knew he was blind. And on one level, that's good. But on another level, it was really bad because they knew why he was blind. He was blind because he was a sinner. That's why you're blind. You or your parents did something really awful. So you're getting what you deserve. That was the perspective. We see it played out in the Gospel of John in the blind man. That was the perspective. You sinned or someone else sinned, and this is why you are in this state. Well, given limited government, given limited whatever, it didn't exactly empower people to be charitable. Why should I give to this sinner, this person who did this, who's only getting what he deserves anyway? Yeah, there was an edge to it. It was not an easy situation. But I think in some ways Bartimaeus is blessed because he does know he's blind, and everyone else knows it too, and he knows what he needs. And he knows there's only one place he can get it. From Jesus, Son of David. Have pity, have mercy on me. And so he comes with unbelievable need to be healed. And God heals him. But there's another part of this story that I think is particularly relevant for us today. And that is the action of the crowd. When he calls out from on the roadside, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me, the crowd says, shh, be quiet, be silent. We won't hear your voice. What does our culture and society say today about voices that we want to say, be quiet, be silent, we won't hear your voice? Is it women who have been sexually abused? Be quiet, we don't want to hear you, we don't want to hear that voice, silence. And the Me Too movement that comes out of that, to raise the voice, to say we will not be silent. Does it look like poor people who live somewhere else? And you know, it's really their own fault that they're like that because they're lazy. And if they really worked, they could be into different things. This is America, and America's great, and they just don't want to do that, so it's their fault. Is that a voice that we silence and say we don't want to hear? What about the voices of those who are abused and were abused in the church? Are they other voices that we say, shh, shh, quiet? We don't want to hear those voices either, that they might come before God for healing? What about the lesbian and gay community? Do we say to them, oh, we don't want to hear your voice? Quiet. We want to pretend that's not part of our experience. Shh, be quiet. How sad is it that it takes years and years before Matthew Shepard could be buried someplace safely where the grave would not be desecrated, and they could only come to the National Cathedral in Washington to do that? What does that say about the voices we're willing to hear and willing to listen to? What about the unborn and the aged that don't even have the voice? Do we want to hear their voices? Or do we keep saying, shh, be silent? What about mental health and mental illness? Voices that we don't want to give money to, voices that we push aside, voices that we say, oh no, shh, I don't want to hear that one either. The voice of women in the church. Shh, we don't want to hear that. How many voices are being offered to us over and over again as amazing grace, as opportunity for God to act and for us to cooperate, to accompany, and we say, shh, I don't want to hear that voice. Be quiet. It happens over and over again in subtle ways and big ways. And that's part of our blindness too, that we can't even hear the voices because they challenge us so profoundly to look in some ways at the wretch that we are and the ways that we judge. We say, oh, this is mine and you can't have it. I can assure you, people are not walking from Central America to the United States out of joy. They aren't just leaving for a fun walk in the park for 2,000 miles across Mexico. It's out of fear. It's out of frustration. It's out of a hope that they choose to walk to a very uncertain future. What is the voice we choose to hear? Stay out. We have desires. We've earned it, worked out. This is an important country. You stay where you are. You don't belong here. You don't look like us. You don't speak our language. Shh. The challenges are so real in what we choose to silence. And so on that level, our cultures and our nations are no different than the people 2,000 years ago that said to Bartimaeus, shh, be quiet. But the voices still cry out to us. And they cry out to God. And God says to those voices, stand up. Come. You know, Teresa says very clearly that in the world today, God's primary mode of operation is us. So God has no hands and legs than ours, but ours. So it's time for us to be empowered, to hear the voices that are broken and allow it to touch us. And yes, rip our hearts out. So we had no awareness of prejudice against Jewish people in the United States. And if it had been just one or two, would we have paid attention? Or does it now have to take 8 and 10 and 11 before we get our attention? How big does the mass murder have to be? If it's just 1 or 2, it gets a little thing down in the corner. We are challenged deeply to our core. And if we were alone, what a wretch we would be. But we are not. Jesus accompanies us on the road and invites us as he invited Bartimaeus. Imagine Bartimaeus. The first thing he sees is the face of God. And God invites him to follow him on the way. That's the moment of transition. And that's our moment. That God is inviting us in wholeness and brokenness to accompany all along the way, to journey along the way. And we're called and capable, because of amazing grace, that we've been saved, to invite others and hold them up and say, come forward. Not shh, come forward. Let us hear your story. Broken or as hard as it might be, because it is your story, and as a son and daughter created and loved in the image of God, you are graced. give us that grace. Therein lies the opportunity. Therein lies the possibility that it's not just God alone, but it's us in conjunction moving along the way to build the city of God. What an extraordinary opportunity we have. It's not sit back and woe is me or woe is us. The sin and brokenness today is no different than it was 2,000 years ago. It's not worse. It's not. It's not a whole lot better, but I don't think it's worse. Might be that we know about it a little bit more because of our penchant for communication, but I don't believe it's any different than it was 2,000 years ago. And they were shushing the blind man. So then that means we are opened, cracked open to this amazing grace that we can be found and we can see and find others and let them see. There's a little video that someone sent me just yesterday that's going around, yes, on social media. But I will describe it for you because it's also what provoked much of what I said today. The video looks like this. It's in an older part of a city, and some boys, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old, are playing basketball. And the ball hits the rim, and it bounces out, and it goes down the alley. Well, of course, the houses are all right next to each other, the way that used to be the case. And the ball goes down the hill, down the alley, and stops at a porch. And so the kid's going down to get the ball. And he gets to the porch, and he sees another boy about the same age, 10 or 12, sitting on the porch. Except the boy's sitting in a wheelchair because he can't walk. So he picks up the basketball guy, and he looks at the kid, and he says, hi. And the boy says, hi. And he goes back to his basketball game. Scene 1. Scene 2, sometime later, I don't know how much later, the little boy comes out on the porch in his wheelchair, and he sees a basketball on the porch. So in his mind, he's thinking, gosh, it happened again. The ball rolled down here, so I'm going to take the basketball back up to the kids on the court. And that's what he does. But when he gets to the court, in the video, or in the piece that's here, he sees the 8 or 10 kids that are there, and every one of them is sitting down in some vehicle, a wagon, a cart, something that they can't walk out of and they can't stand. And now he plays basketball with them, and they're all seated in some wheelchair-like device. That's what we're called to do. To empathize, to understand the experience of another, and simply allow them to be who they are, with the graces they are, and invite them into community. Because that's what happened to Bartimaeus. He was invited back into community. Healed of his sin, if that's the way the culture of the time saw it, able to see, and now simply able to be who he was. I'm not suggesting we all need to be blind to figure out what it means to be blind, or we all have to be lame to figure out what it means. It simply means that we refuse to say shh anymore, and we open ourselves only to saying, he is calling you, we are calling you, get up, because together we're better when we follow you along the way.